gentleman suggested that I tried what he referred to as the Madonna Mike. So I'm going to try it. Can people hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. If at some point you can't, just kind of shout and we'll see what we do. I picked the title of That Doesn't Happen in Social Care because when we started talking to people in social care about restraint, that was sometimes the answer that we got. I'll explain. You probably get why it's in quotes. I toyed with the idea of changing the title after yesterday to Wine, Women and Song. And hopefully that'll become apparent why. For those of you who weren't here earlier, that just sounds like complete madness, but we will progress. So, some people here have heard me talk before, and some people were here last year, and some of these slides and the things I'm going to say are a bit repetitive. I live with someone with dementia, so if you think you're getting bored with repetition, bring it on. I'm going to mention them anyway in case people haven't heard of things. So we heard this morning from Guy about the launch of the Positive and Safe programme and the guidance Positive and Proactive Care. And at the same time, Skills for Care and Skills for Health work together to produce a positive and proactive workforce. I'm hoping most people here will have seen this document. Would you raise your hands if you have? Yeah, see, I didn't shame anybody who hadn't, but that's good to know most people have. It was launched at the same time, and they both have the remit of covering all of health and social care. So everything from a ward where somebody's recovering from an anaesthetic after an operation, to accident and emergency on, let's say, 3 o'clock on a Friday morning. Don't know why I've picked Friday, but there we are. Through to care homes, residential services, and the 3 people who come to my house and help me look after my dad. Adults and England. Just put that out there. And we both have this shared definition of what we mean by restrictive practices, because both guides actually cover restrictive practices, and we've heard in various workshops about different terminology. But it's any time you're stopping someone doing something they want to do or making them do something they don't want to do, you are carrying out a restrictive practice. The aim of the guidance is to minimise that. That's not to remove it. Sometimes a restrictive practice is absolutely the right thing to do, and not to do it would be negligent. Minimising it is not necessarily about reducing the number of times it happens. It could be about minimising the effect and impact, that negative impact that has for someone, which might mean doing it more often in a different way. This was my little mental picture of what it all was. And hopefully, again, is this familiar to people? Do you want to? Yeah. So thinking about, you've got situations that are very, very well planned, you can prepare for. You've got situations where, as we were hearing yesterday, somebody's brought in handcuffs, the police take the handcuffs off and say to people in A&E, there you are, he's not in a public place now. And they know nothing about that person. Different groups of people. We've got some approaches down here that might work with people with dementia, some up there that might work with people with autism, some around people who've got mental health problems. And as we all know, which of us is ever going to fit neatly in one of those boxes? Certainly not across the course of our life. And an idea that right in the middle you may have those physically restrictive interventions that you have to do, or chemically restrictive interventions, or physical or mechanical, but around that there's a whole range of things that might be restrictive practices that you do, either for a positive reason or because they're implicit in the situation you're in, or they have to happen for one person and they just happen to affect other people. And our workforce guide didn't give anybody any answers. Maybe it gave some people some answers, but it hopefully helps people work through what is my workforce in relation to minimising restrictive practices. What is it that they do, and so therefore what do they need to know? What skills and confidence and knowledge do they need, and what's the best way to develop that? That is some of the stuff that was either in it that was new or that people want if they want to know exactly what it is we're saying, and you're obviously not going to read that there, but you're getting the slides after the event and it's in the document. So there were some new things that we said, like anybody who's training in restrictive practices should have a training qualification and be competent in what they're training people in, which seems pretty sensible to me. Bank staff and self-employed PAs should be trained in line with the rest of the team. People need to understand the Mental Capacity Act. Hopefully that's useful. And everything that we put in backed up the document ensuring quality services and what they said about workforce development. So that particularly relates to people who have learning disabilities and/or autism and behaviour that challenges. So that's a quick run through and a list of stuff that's happened since that you might need to follow up on, stuff that's important to you. I realise I'm speeding through this, but that's because I think you possibly know a load of this. And you want to get to the wine, women and song, yeah? Okay. Little mini guide we did about PBS. And just to kind of, before I talk a little bit more personally, to think about what we mean by restrictions and how that feels to someone. I'm not going to compare being held face down by 5 people with never being able to go out and get a breath of fresh air, or not being allowed to have a beloved pet with you, or finding that the cleaners moved your walking frame out of reach and you can't get up for an hour. I'm not going to compare them, because you can't compare them and there is no need. Because what we've heard over these 2 days is oftentimes it's those what might be thought of as smaller restrictions that lead to the situations where the bigger ones have to happen. And actually maybe a lifetime of never being able to go outside when you want to. What impact is that going to have on someone's life? I'm going to have a sip of the communal water of which all speakers have drunk. So just to draw your attention to some of these things, mobile phones, hugely contentious issue, but for many people it's a really important, valuable thing. I don't think many people would happily hand me your mobile phone or your wallet, not knowing what I'm going to do with it, when you're going to get it back, if you're going to get it back. And yet we sometimes ask that of people in services. The lock in the bottom door isn't a lock you lock someone in with, it's my bathroom door that I appreciate being able to lock because my house is normally full of teenagers and I don't want to feel somebody might walk in on me in the bathroom, whatever I might be choosing to do there. Many services don't allow people that facility and don't allow it in a blanket way, not because that person has been assessed at being at risk and that's what they need, but just because the doors don't have locks or people aren't shown how to use them. Or they do have locks, but actually every member of staff just routinely opens them. Just want to rest for a minute on what we know about evidence for mental well-being. And this is off NHS Choices, so it's obviously right. But we know this stuff. We know, don't we? What keeps people well is being busy, being physically or mentally active, connecting with other people, having a sense of purpose in your life, getting outdoors, having daylight and fresh air, having an opportunity to give to other people and make a contribution. How often do we make sure that our services provide this for people, both people who work there and people who are using that service? And the reason we wanted to keep that big definition of restrictive practices is because, as Sam was saying, and other people have said, this comes down, legally and ethically, to a series of decisions and questions and processes that we need to work through. Is there a real risk of serious harm to the individual or someone else? Because if not, we shouldn't be doing anything restrictive. Does the person have the mental capacity to make that decision themselves? Because if not, we should not be doing it. If they do, we should not be doing anything restrictive. Not to say we might not do anything, not to say we just go, oh, well, go and hurt yourself then, that's fine. We would do something, but we don't have a legal and ethical right to do anything restrictive to somebody who is only going to harm themselves and has the mental capacity to make that decision. All of the other questions there are equally important, And I think our viewpoint and my passion is that if people are thinking through these questions on a day-to-day basis for issues like, can somebody choose to have a glass of red wine? Can somebody choose to have half a pot of jam at breakfast every morning? Should we be stopping this person from whatever it is? If we think about that, about those everyday decisions and lifestyle decisions, God forbid somebody should apply some of these questions to decisions I make for my life, let alone at other points in my life, then maybe people will be better equipped to make that decision when they come to doing something that is more obviously recognisable as restraint. So, personal example. Where are we? We've got a bit of time. This for me all comes back to risk, and I've put this link up here. I don't know if people have heard of Professor David Spiegelhalter. I can't say it very well. Anyone heard of him? Oh, fantastic. Right, I could talk for 3 hours about this, but I won't. He is the Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk, and he's got some fantastic stuff to say and fantastic, really easy to use resources on his website. So go on to Understanding Uncertainty. I heartily recommend it. One of the things he did recently was, it was in the papers, that eating bacon sandwiches raises your risk of bowel cancer by 20%, which sounds scary. He's got loads of resources that show it raises the risk by 20%, but that's 20% of what the risk was, and the risk was 5%. So it raises it by 20% of 5%, and I'm rubbish at maths, but even I can see that's a small difference. So it makes a difference, but your risk is still much less than 1 in 10, whether you eat bacon sandwiches or you don't. And that's not to say that it isn't a thing for somebody to consider if there are other factors in their life. But when you see on the front of a newspaper, 20% increased risk if you eat, and it's not that. And the reason I think this is important is because these decisions that we're making about whether somebody's got capacity and then what's in someone's best interest, they're based on risk, aren't they? And I can't wait to hear Roger speaking about risk later on. I'm really keen to do that. But oftentimes it's less a direct risk of violence and more a vague feeling that somebody would be at risk if they did something. So thinking about this morning, if somebody left these premises, they'd be at risk. Would they? Of what? How big a risk? How does that compare to the risk if they stay here? How does it compare to the risk of everybody else who's just out there walking up and down the street? And I don't know that anybody's got any information about that. So my personal example is about my dad. That's a picture of my dad, Ernie. His picture there is taken in World War II. He decided at 18, although he was in a reserved occupation, to become a rear gunner in Lancaster bombers, about the most dangerous thing you could do at that time. Because he rightly supposed he'd get more girls to dance with him if he had wings on his shoulders. After the war, he decided that he hadn't had enough danger and he would spend his life running in and out of burning buildings, rescuing people. Or hopefully putting fires out too, but I think it was the running in and out that he really went for. And as always, I checked with Dad, because I'm going to talk about him and the fact that he's got dementia. So I asked him if it was okay to talk to you all about him and show his photos. And he said he couldn't give them monkeys. So that was a ringing endorsement. And then when I mentioned photos, he said, make sure you put one up of me and my medals. So, because it was Sunday when I asked him, this is a picture of us on Sunday, and I've just about squeezed the medals in there. It's very cold on Sunday morning in the northeast, I have to say. Ooh. So, the reason risk mattered to me and became an issue for us was about 4 years ago. Hey, stop it, behave yourself. About 4 years ago, we were a bit worried about Dad. An OT came in to do an assessment. We weren't sure if he'd been going in his back garden in the middle of the night. At the time, he was living on his own, going to the shops, and there were things that were worrying me about that. So the OT came to do the risk assessment about that, or the assessment, and said to me, well, he'd obviously be much safer in a care home. So I didn't mull it over. I said, oh, right, okay, well, what's that based on? And she was a bit taken aback and said, well, it's very cluttered here and there's lots of tripping hazards. So I said, well, okay, we'll try and do something about that. I must not be seeing them. What are the tripping hazards? And she explained, and I'll show you in a minute what that was. But when I thought about that he would obviously be safer in a care home, I was trying to get my head around what, and it felt like that was a reasonable thing to say, I have to say, but I thought, well, safer from what? And because again, statistics say that your average life expectancy is 18 months when you move into a care home. So that was 4 years ago, just saying. So I realised, really, I think what she meant is if he was in a care home, he wouldn't be going to the shops and he wouldn't have the opportunity to walk into the back garden in the middle of the night. So yes, he would be safer, but is that really good? So anyway, we went and looked around a few care homes, 7 actually. Couldn't find a one in which he would be able to walk outside and get a breath of fresh air when he wanted to. At the time, he could walk. He now uses the walking frame. And really, that was my baseline. I wanted somewhere where he'd be able to just open a door, step outside like he'd done all his life, and sit outside in a bit of fresh air. And I started thinking, am I asking for the moon and the stars? Should I just give up on this? And at the time, Dad was losing the ability to enjoy a lot of things that he used to enjoy. He couldn't follow sitcoms. He didn't understand what people were laughing at on the telly. He couldn't follow dramas, lost the ability to write stories and letters, which he used to do. And so somebody suggested putting a playlist of music together, and I asked him what tracks he would like on his playlist of music. And I had a few in my mind that I'd heard him sing or play on the piano that I thought he might choose. And this is the one that he chose, which took me a bit by surprise. What I took, sorry, it was abrupt that, wasn't it? What I took from that was the message that going around and looking at these care homes was not exactly feeling great to me. He also said one afternoon when we were having a cup of coffee in the park after we'd been to visit one, he said to me, have you got me somewhere to sleep tonight? And I said, well, you'll be sleeping at home, Dad. And, you know, he'd kept the sense that we were looking at places, but lost the memory that he actually had a home. So we decided a care home wasn't going to work for us just right then. And I have to preface this, I'm not dissing all care homes, but it didn't work for us. So we helped Dad at home for a bit, and then what's eventually happened is that now Dad lives with us. So this is my little diagram of Dad and his care and support. So there's us, and then I've called them Annie and Rona only because these slides get sent round. They're actually called Amy and Rita, who come and help us so that we can go out with our kids and go to work and do other things. Goes to a day centre 4 days a week. We now also use an agency because Annie and Rita are fantastic, but let's call her Paula, wasn't fantastic and kept not turning up when she was meant to turn up and leaving her food and dinner dishes lying around. So yeah. GP, can't praise my GP practice enough without them. Dad would undoubtedly be in residential care and possibly not anywhere. He does go to a care home, and I'm going to talk about it in a bit. He goes to a care home when we want to go away for a few days or have a holiday. And there's a few other people up here that I'm just bobbing up there to show you all the important things. Where's the podiatrist gone? Oh yeah, she's there. Podiatry, absolutely essential to us, keeping Dad up and about on his feet and happy to walk about. Really hard to get. They have a window of opportunity to make your appointment, so he needs to go every 3 months, but you've got to find the exact 6-week window to ring up and make the appointment, and then when those appointments are all gone, you can't get another one until the next 6-week window opens up. I'm like, this can't be a good way. Getting something so essential. Blue badge, I spent 2 hours. I had to send in another certified copy of his birth certificate to renew his blue badge. If he existed 3 years ago, and Anyway, that diagram's what it looks like as a diagram. This is what it looks like in real life. Just happened that every little help's popped up behind it. You'll see here tripping hazard 2 and tripping hazard 3. They were the tripping hazard. The house is full of children and dogs. Okay. Never tripped on any of those tripping hazards in 4 years. He does go and stay at a care home, and he often has a bump or a bruise or a bump or a graze or whatever a bruise is, I don't know. But that's, if you're going to go to an unfamiliar environment with other people who are unsteady on your feet, I think that's going to happen. I'm touching some wood as I'm saying he's never tripped on the tripping hazards. Because at the end of the day, it's a balance, isn't it? People say, oh, we want you to be safe and well. Well, what the heck is safe and well? If you did an assessment on me now, am I well? If I looked around this room, could I go, right, you lot, you're all well, and you lot, you're not well. Which of us is safe? How safe are we right now? Do any of you know? How did you get here today or yesterday? Did you work out how safe your method of transport was as against your alternatives? I bet you didn't. You either jumped in the car or booked a train, because that's how we live our lives. We do what we do. And there's no such thing as safe. It's a balance. If we want to be more safe, we have to give up some freedom. If we want to take more risk, then, you know, we're going to perhaps get more good experiences, but we're going to have to take that risk. And that's one of the reasons why I love the Professor for the Public Understanding of Risk. I just snapped this in London the other day. Do not run. I thought, well, that's fantastic advice, isn't it? What, ever? Never? If someone's chasing you, do not run. If you never run in your life, I'm sure the Professor for the Understanding of Risk could work out what the chances are that you're going to have a negative outcome from never running, as opposed to what they obviously meant was on this station right here, although still, and I'm not sure. So, another plug for that, and a little quote that I absolutely adore from Lord Justice Mumby. What's the point in making someone safe if it makes them miserable? If that's what safeguarding does, isn't it just another abuse? And he actually says, and in fact one that's carried out by the state. I love that quote. I hope people can use it when they're doing risk assessments. I have a little bit longer to go. A micromort won't say too much. The chance that any of us might die that day of a sudden unexpected accident or illness that we weren't expecting, obviously. Most of us in this country face a one micromort per day, one chance in a million that will die unexpectedly that day. Obviously, it depends how old you are, whether it's less or more than one. For a man aged 90, it's 463 in a million, which is still a smallish risk, but it's a hell of a lot more than one. So when Dad, who's 90, makes choices about his life, or we make choices in his best interests, I like to keep that statistic in mind. And the wine part of my presentation would be to think about Lynn's 94-year-old chap who wanted a glass of red wine. So presumably his chances are considerably more than 463 that he's going to die any day. So why are we not letting him have a glass of red wine? What is it that we're protecting him from? So this is our restrictive practice. Which one of these would you eat? You may say neither. But I will want some audience interaction. Somebody's going to have to say something. Nobody would eat any of them. You would eat the flax seeds. Thank you very much. There's always a brave person who will go first. Right. If the question's which is safe to eat, maybe that's a better question. Yeah, flaxseed. I guess you know where I'm going. If you can't read, or your ability to understand words, or actually you're 90 and the word flaxseed doesn't mean a lot to you, you may well be confused about which of these is safe to eat. So which of these would you drink? Well, one of them's Asda fruit and barley water, and one of them is fabric conditioner. And the fabric conditioner came in a bottle not unlike one of these. Again, one is juice, one is fabric conditioner. We had an incident where Dad got mixed up and poured himself a lovely big glass of fabric conditioner with hugely entertaining, and I mean hugely entertaining results. And so we have a rule in our house now, don't go in the kitchen on your own. If Dad lived in his own place, you could probably lock that stuff away. If he lived in a care home, undoubtedly it'd be locked away, but he doesn't. He lives with a load of other people who won't put stuff back in cupboards. So bottles get left out. So that's our rule, don't go in the kitchen on your own at night. But it's a restrictive practice. We're stopping him doing something that he wants. I kind of feel, and I'm happy to be challenged, that it's a sensible one, and that in that minute, if I sat down and said to Dad, do you want to drink fabric conditioner? He'd say, of course not. But in that minute when he's pouring it out, he doesn't, in my opinion, have the capacity to make an informed decision whether to drink that or not. So I restrict that from him. But that's fine, that's in my house, I'm a family carer. I can do what I want, frankly, especially because Dad pays for his care. So there's nobody who I can ask if they think I've made the right decision. Well, I can ask. I actually asked social services if I was making the right decision with a big amount of his money once. And they said, oh, yeah, we don't get involved. So could I pay a social worker to sit for an hour and talk with me through the decisions I'm making? She said, that'd be a good idea, wouldn't it? No, we can't do that. She said, why don't you go and see a solicitor? Well, so I'm going to pay a solicitor to... I just thought, no, I'm not. I'll just make my own decisions then. This came out last night from Carers UK. The value of unpaid care in this country, £132 billion, which is only a little bit less than the value of the healthcare spending. There are lots of people in our situation. We went on some training recently that was put on for family carers of people with dementia. It was a thoroughly depressing day, for lots of reasons. It felt as though the people in the room felt into two distinct groups. There were people who just had a relative diagnosed, often with mild cognitive impairment, MCI, new buzzword, who got quite a lot of useful information about thinking ahead, I think, thinking about the future, thinking about things like power of attorney. The other half of the room were people like us who've been caring for a little while now, and when they asked what we wanted from the day, and then paid no attention to it, most of those people, what they wanted was help to deal with some form of difficult or challenging behaviour, or some element of risk or danger to the person that they were dealing with. And the advice that we got on the day was, stay calm, don't take it personally, and don't get into conflict. Which is all fantastic advice, but yeah, how do you do that? There was a man there who's been caring for his wife for 20 years since she was diagnosed at the age of 49. She's prone to repetitive urinary tract infections, and him and her sister are physically, forcibly showering her on a daily basis, and she is physically fighting him back on a daily basis. Don't get into conflict then. Oh, right, why didn't I think of that? How do you do that when a loved one who has diabetes and dementia is wanting to continually eat chocolate? How do you not get into conflict? How do you not get into conflict when somebody's wanting to undo their trousers and have a pee in Asda car park? You just go, oh, that's all right then. You know, how do you not take it personally when somebody's saying, you are not the person I thought you were a good wife, daughter, husband? I think we really need to think about this. It's difficult enough to deal with these issues in services when you're being paid, and maybe you've had a long and tiring shift, but you certainly haven't been doing it 24/7 for the last 20 years. But there's not a lot of help, support and advice out there for families to deal with this. Trying to end on a slightly more positive, move on a slightly more positive note. Not going in the kitchen on your own at night doesn't mean never going in the kitchen. In fact, it means finding lots of opportunities to be in the kitchen doing something useful. I refer you to the blur on the tea towel in the top right-hand corner. My cutlery only ever gets dried properly when Dad puts it away, and I have on occasion rinsed some cutlery just so that he could dry it and put it away, because that was better than having a never-ending repetitive argument about whatever it was that he felt he needed and wanted to do. And that's giving him a sense of purpose. To some extent, it's a restrictive practice. It's a psychological restrictive practice because I'm diverting him from what he's saying he wants to do into something else. But again, I would argue, if you think through those questions about the level of harm and what's proportionate response to that, it's a fairly constructive thing to do. I don't just use him as cheap labour to dry cutlery. I also use him as cheap labour to peel potatoes and count money and do lots of other things. And patience, playing patience with cards. In fact, Dad will say sometimes now, oh, I'm getting upset with all this. Give me cards, that'll calm me down. I am going to end. I know I'm running on a bit, but I just really wanted to show you this little example. The care home Dad goes and stays at, I think it's brilliant in loads of ways. The CQC report on it's pretty damning, but I like it because it's bright and cheery and people chat and talk. And when we went and knocked on the door at 7:30 at night to see if we could make an appointment to look round, they said, oh, well, just come in, we'll show you around now. And people looked up and were engaged. But Dad went there just a few weeks ago when we went to Flamingo Land for a week. And when I went to pick him up, this was there in the foyer. Now, these are inflatable. They actually appeared in the summer when they were sporting shorts and sitting in a little wooden tray of sand and had a beach ball. And obviously this was just before Halloween. Honestly, how many people look at that and think sex dolls? Oh, thank you, sir. There's only you and me in the room, apparently, but that's what I thought. Look at the position they're in. Can you buy inflatable dolls that aren't sex dolls? So, I've got a horrible, tiny suspicion that somebody said to somebody in the home, you haven't got dolls in place. But I kid you not, I wish I was creative enough to have set this up. But I haven't. It's a genuine photo of the last time I went to pick my dad up. But what happened after that was that I rounded the corner and saw a member of staff, and she went, oh, you've come to pick Ernie up. And I went, yeah. And then she went, oh. And I went, what do you mean, oh? She said, well, the lift's broken. And he stays on the second floor. And he uses a wheelchair and a walking frame now. So he couldn't come home that night because there was no way of getting him downstairs. So he wasn't really free to leave, was he? But nobody's done any sort of assessment of whether he does have capacity, should be detained, should have his liberty curtailed. All kinds of goes out the window if the one lift in the building's broken, doesn't it? So I think that's me. I've stuck a few quotes up there that came out of the initial project because I have blathered on about me and my family an awful lot, and we need to remember this doesn't apply to one specific situation. But that's me done. Oh.